All right, man, peace. So, brothers, at one particular time, I was a major fan of Major League Baseball, as I was of the other two major sports as well as boxing. I wouldn't call myself a fan of anything at this point in my life as an adult. But I first began to watch Major League Baseball in 1990, which was Darryl Strawberry's last year with the New York Mets. I was a Mets fan all throughout the 90s. Of course, my favorite player was Barry Bonds and also Ken Griffey Jr. Ken Griffey Jr. was the most naturally talented baseball player I've ever seen. Barry Bonds was the best baseball player I've ever seen. And when I think back to the 1990s, I always consider it the golden age of baseball for me because there were so many prominent and prestigious black American ball players, so-called black, like Kirby Puckett, Tony Gwynn, Greg Vaughn, Mo Vaughn, as I've already named, Darryl Strawberry, Doc Gooden, Barry Bonds, Ken Griffey Jr., Kirby Puckett, Fred McGriff. These are some of the top names of my childhood and adolescence. Why do I bring that up? Because that time period culminated in what is known today as the juice ball era, aka the steroid era of the mid to late 90s. And it was typified by the home run race in 1998 between Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa. Both men were battling to see who would be able to break Roger Maris's home run record, which he himself set in 1961, if I remember correctly. And he also happened to hit 61 home runs that year. And as it turned out, both men broke Roger Maris's record. Mark McGwire hit 70 home runs and Sammy Sosa hit 66. And that was an extremely integral part of baseball history because what it did was it precipitated Barry Bonds to begin heavy usage of performance-enhancing drugs, which brought about the eventual fall of baseball for a certain period of time, where they had to rebuild their image because they became associated with performance-enhancing drugs. I say all that to say this: Mr. Mark McGwire has come out and alleged 20 years after the fact that he believes that he could have hit 70 home runs without performance-enhancing drugs. So, of course, they're going to talk about it, and I'm going to chime in.
This is SportsCenter Right Now. I'm Will Reeve. 20 years ago, Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa had the whole country digging the long ball. The home run chase of '98 has been discredited now due to the presence of performance-enhancing drugs, but McGwire says he would have hit 70 even if he were clean.
Well, we know that that's not a fact because if he truly felt that way, he would never have started to take performance-enhancing drugs in the first place. And for those of you brothers who are old enough to have watched baseball in that era, you know that there was a very sudden uptick in home runs starting around 1994, right after the strike. They had a baseball strike in 94, or 93 or 94. One of you brothers can correct me. It's one of those 2 years. And when they came back, suddenly the balls were just hopping off of baseball bats all across Major League Baseball. And you saw a resurgence of many baseball players who had been dormant for a few years, Mark McGwire being one of them. Also on the pitching side, Roger Clemens came out of dormancy, per se, if you want to use that term. And he suddenly became a dominant pitcher again. He had a 20 strikeout performance in his last season with the Boston Red Sox, and then he went to the Toronto Blue Jays and had a couple of outstanding seasons before he signed with the New York Yankees. I say all that to say this: it's very common for people today to state that this person doesn't need to take performance-enhancing drugs and PEDs don't help someone do this or they don't help someone do that. Especially LeBron James super fans, they'll say, well, LeBron doesn't need to take PEDs because PEDs don't help you pass the basketball or get rebounds or dunk the basketball. Well, I mean, well, shit, if PEDs don't help anybody with anything, then why the hell do people take them for then? They clearly have an effect in some positive type of way. And Mark McGwire, there was a certain period where he was relatively dormant before he started to re-emerge in the early to mid-90s. I remember when this man hit a home run in the Kingdome that must have went 600 feet. It was unbelievable. I think you can look it up on YouTube. He hit it off of Randy Johnson. For those of you who don't know, Randy Johnson was a 6'10" left-handed pitcher who used to throw 100 miles an hour back when there were only about 2 or 3 starters in Major League Baseball who could throw 100 miles an hour when they wanted to. Now most of these guys can throw it up to 100 miles an hour. A lot of the relievers are throwing 106, 107 miles an hour. But Mark McGwire hit a shot back in the old Seattle Kingdome into the third or fourth deck. It was unbelievable. This was like back in like maybe 94, 95.
He told Stadium TV, quote, "I was a born home run hitter. I mean, unfortunately, I did take PEDs, and I've regretted that. I've talked about it. I regretted it. I didn't need to. That's the thing. Didn't need to."
Well, that's what he needs to tell himself. He needs to tell himself that I didn't need to take those performance-enhancing drugs, because he has to convince himself of that lie so that when he starts to lobby for Hall of Fame induction, he can try to convince others, the people who will be privy to the voting and will have the power to either induct him into the Hall or deny him. Always remember, I made this statement in the video about bald-headed liars. A bald-headed liar needs to convince themselves about their delusion so that they can therefore convince others.
Need to, but I know deep down inside, I know me as a hitter, and I know what I did in that box.
Dude, please stop. You were a power hitter. You were a slugger. You as a hitter, you had seasons where you barely cracked 200. I remember early in the 1990s, Mark McGwire had a season where he barely cracked the Mendoza line. For those of you who don't know, the Mendoza line is hitting 200.
Box, and I know how strong my mind is, and I know what kind of hitter I became. And
yeah, you became that hitter because of androstenedione. That was Mark McGwire's steroid of choice, and I remember, like yesterday, he was being interviewed at his locker, and a certain reporter noticed the bottle of androstenedione directly behind him in his locker. He was so sloppy about it, he didn't even try to hide it. And then he went on to deny it. I'm trying to remember what his cover story was when he was first found to have the androstenedione in his locker.
Came, and yes, definitely. More First Take right now.
Thank you. So Mark McGwire says he would have hit 70 home runs without PEDs. Max, my question is, why did he take them then? What's your reaction to this?
Oh, he absolutely would have. Over the course of 2 seasons, he could have easily hit 70 home runs.
That's assuming that he would have been healthy enough to continue playing in Major League Baseball over the course of 2 seasons and playing in enough games that would have allowed him to average 35 home runs a season, because he had injury issues. And he was first introduced to steroids in the late 80s by Jose Canseco, who was one of the more prominent baseball players of that era in the late 1980s. I believe he was the first man to hit 40 home runs and steal 40 bases. I'm trying to remember if there was someone before him, but I believe he was the first person to do that.
Mark McGwire's saying this is so obnoxious it almost defies description. Mark McGwire and Sosa are the reasons Bonds started juicing.
Absolutely. I mean, we don't want to blame them. Barry Bonds is a grown man. He made his decision, but Barry Bonds decided that he wanted to keep up with the Joneses.
Because they took his rightful place as the best player in the game away from him.
Amen.
Along with the money. That's why he had to start juicing. Famously, there was a conversation reported between Bonds and Ken Griffey about it, where Bonds is like, these guys robbed me, basically.
Barry Bonds was a funny dude, man. Barry Bonds, he's one of the few athletes back in that era, in the early 90s, that would make racially charged comments. Him and Charles Barkley were the only 2 players in professional sports that I can remember who will consistently make racially charged comments in an era where, for the most part, athletes were concerned about their corporate brand. That's why I laughed when they tried to highlight Michael Jordan. There was no one who was, quote-unquote, speaking up in that era. Not Magic Johnson, not Isaiah Thomas, not Shannon Sharp, not Ken Griffey Jr. Nobody prominent was doing that, other than Barry Bonds and Charles Barkley. And they were both known or associated with being mentally unstable.
Mark McGwire came into the league. Let me explain this very carefully, because there's no ambiguity about it. He came into the league as a 23-year-old, hit 49 home runs. He wasn't a fast player. He wasn't a great defender. He struck out a lot. He walked a lot. And he hit for a decent batting average. That's what Bill James, the godfather of sabermetrics, calls old man skills. Meaning you get to the league as a big, strong guy with plate discipline. That's where a lot of younger hitters with high batting average, good with the glove, everything, don't take a lot of walks. They develop into that later. What that means when you get to the league with old man skills but not great athleticism is you will tend to have a shorter career. And in fact, if you see the trajectory of Mark McGwire's career, and 49 home runs next year, 32, 33. He popped up to 39, then 22. And if you look more importantly at the on-base and slugging, basically every year it's going down.
Absolutely. I remember very distinctly, it may have been my first year watching baseball. I think that was the year where he had the 22 home run season. One of those seasons he hit just over the Mendoza line. I think he hit like 201. He was struggling. He was on his way out of Major League Baseball. He can try to front all he wants. I remember that era. The Oakland A's had a great team in the late 80s. They had Ricky Henderson. They had Dave Stewart at pitcher. They had Dennis Eckersley at closer. Mark McGwire at first base. And, of course, Jose Canseco. Canseco and Mark McGwire were known as the Bash Brothers. I remember that very, very distinctly. They had a World Series against the Dodgers where they got swept. They had another World Series against the Cincinnati Reds that they lost. And I believe they beat the San Francisco Giants in '89. So they went to 3 straight World Series, if I remember correctly. If I'm wrong, one of you brothers can correct me. But I believe in '88, they played the Dodgers and they got swept. That's the series where Kirk Gibson hit the game-winning home run in Game 1. In '89, they beat the San Francisco Giants. That was the World Series for the 2 Bay Area teams. And I also believe that was the World Series where they had that very large mega earthquake. And then in 1990, they played the Cincinnati Reds and lost. That Reds team had Barry Larkin and Eric Davis. I also believe they had Rob Dibble at closer.
His batting average is getting lower. There are little blips like this, but it's basically trending this way, exactly as you would expect. As a guy who gets to the league with old man skills, ages, is hurt, whatever. Now, I don't think he started juicing Stephen A. when, the year he hit 70 home runs, obviously. In fact,
no, he started juicing from the very start. He was juicing from when he first came into the league because Jose Canseco introduced him to steroids. He just got better quality steroids in the early 90s. That's what led about his resurgence.
In fact, if I had to guess, I would guess around 1992, where he got into 139 games and yet he hit 42 home runs. Now, I can't definitively say that. He led the league in slugging percentage that year, but he had done that as a rookie, too. It's not like at that point he was better than he'd ever been. He was just as good as he'd ever been. But right after that point, he was better than he's ever been. Not just with the home run totals, 39 in 104 games. How about this? 52, 58, 70, 65. He would have never sniffed those numbers, including the 52 at that stage in his career, without the juice. But more...
As well as the juice baseballs. The baseballs were juiced as well. Major League Baseball understood that they were in a bit of a conundrum after the strike. They had lost a lot of fan appeal after that strike in '94, I believe it was. And when they came back with juice baseballs. And it did. It really reinvigorated baseball for a while. That is the most memorable era for me, that mid to late 90s era. And there were certain players that will always stand out. Ken Griffey Jr. was unbelievable. He was one of the top athletes of the 1990s. The top natural athletes.
More tellingly, Stephen A., it's the on-base and slugging. He went from a guy who in a good season was in the high 3s on base and in the high 5s slugging to a guy who was in the high 4s on base, 100 points higher, and in the 7s slugging, 150 points higher than he was at his best. That doesn't magically happen because you have discipline in your early to mid-30s. That happens because you cheated. Mark McGwire cheated his way to the record.
Well, Max Kellerman, how come you were not saying these things about Manny Pacquiao when it seemed as if Manny Pacquiao's career was starting to peter out at the 130-pound weight class? Or even your compatriot Jim Lampley noted in one of Pacquiao's last fights at 130 that clearly Pacquiao was going to max out at 130 and that he no longer had the pop. He seemingly was getting tired in the middle of fights, and he no longer had the power to stop his opponents. And then suddenly he moves up to 135 and starts knocking guys out again. How come you didn't note the same changes in Pacquiao that you're noting in Mark McGwire? That people just don't suddenly have a resurgence and athletic renewal in their late 20s, early 30s, unless they're the recipients of performance-enhancing drugs.
He cheated Roger Maris out of the record, as did Sammy Sosa. He pressured Barry Bonds to cheat. Bonds is responsible for his own behavior, but Mark McGwire put pressure there, and the fact that he...
Well, Barry Bonds put pressure on himself because he has such a large ego and he was so arrogant. Barry Bonds was almost comically arrogant. But he's very similar to LeBron James. He was justifiably arrogant because he truly was the best in his sport. Once again, in my view, Ken Griffey Jr. was the most naturally talented, the most naturally gifted baseball player I've ever seen. I mean, he truly was a 5-tool player. Great fielder, great arm, great on the base pass, could hit for power, hit for average. But Barry Bonds was the best overall player that I've seen. The only thing that Barry lacked was a great arm. But his anticipation in the outfield was so great that he oftentimes was able to throw guys out at third or at home, even though unfortunately he was unable to throw out Sid Bream at home base in the 1992 NLCS, which I still look back at and get frustrated about because I was rooting for the Pittsburgh Pirates that season. I was rooting for them to beat the Atlanta Braves because I like Barry Bonds, man. But they didn't get it done. That's life.
You would have the gall to come out now, the nerve, and say he could have done it without the PEDs, then why didn't you? Because you'd have been out of the league in a couple of years the way you were trending, Mark McGwire, without the PEDs.
Damn, Max Kellerman's veins are popping. What you so mad about, Max?
You're a pure creation of the juice. Not you weren't a good home run hitter early. You were a great home run hitter briefly earlier in your career. You were an all-time great home run hitter as a creation of the juice. And if you claim otherwise, then you shouldn't have taken it. He doesn't have a leg to stand on here.
But
I pretty much agree with you, Max Kellerman, even though you seem a little bit too excited about this topic.
Well, I deeply appreciate you leaving me something to debate there, because I thank you so much for that. Let's be clear. I have nothing to add to this. Mark.
Okay, so then let's close off the segment then. If you ain't got nothing to add, then just shut the hell up.
Mark McGwire, as far as I'm concerned, is a cheat. And here's my biggest thing. I will say this, Max Kellerman.
It's amazing to me. Both these guys are so mad at Mark McGwire, but they were ready to have Triple G get in the ring with Canelo Alvarez, even though he had tested positive twice for performance-enhancing drugs. Ain't that a bitch? So you mad at Mark McGwire for juicing in baseball, but you're not upset with Canelo Alvarez for having a performance-enhancing drug injected into his body in a sport where he was going to engage in combat with another man. And I'm sure people are going to say, well, Triple G is probably on something too. I've already stated that in another video. Yes, Triple G is probably on something as well, allegedly. But the point being is this. If you know that someone is incompetent enough to get caught taking performance-enhancing drugs, the event has to be at the very least rescheduled, if not called off, in a combat sport. Bottom line.
I mean, this is where I deviate from you a little bit. You said, Max, if I remember correctly, you think he started cheating in 1992?
I think it's possible. I won't say definitively, but certainly the year he hit the 52 home runs.
No. The year he hit the 52 home runs was 1996, Max. He hit 42 in 1992. Here's where I'm at.
92.
Here's where I'm at.
Go ahead. Yeah, 92, he was as good as he'd ever been, but not better. After that, he got better than ever.
I believe he started cheating in 1995 when he hit 39 home runs.
No, that's when he got the good shit, was in 1995. He started cheating from his first day in the majors because that's when Jose Canseco hit him off with that good stuff in the locker room. All right? That's why they was known as the Bash Brothers. They was probably bashing syringes into each other. I have little doubt about that. Because Jose Canseco was on record. Jose Canseco was the damn whistleblower. He's the one who started the whole steroid scandal in Major League Baseball. So you mean to tell me he was on the same team with Mark McGwire for all those years and he never told Mark McGwire anything about what to use, how to use it, and how to maximize his performance for the team? I'm not buying it. But, you know, one of you brothers out there may have read Jose Canseco's book, and you can inform me on what he stated in the book. But I believe that Mark McGwire was using something from the late 80s when he first came up to the major leagues. Allegedly.
That was the year after the cancellation of the World Series. Here's why. Baseball needed to resurrect itself.
Absolutely. I remember like it was yesterday.
Who's going to check you? Nobody's going to check you.
And I remember the Yankees had the best record in the American League in 1994, and I believe in the National League, the Montreal Expos, or at least at the time known as the Montreal Expos, I believe now they're known as the Washington Nationals, they had the best record in the NL when the season was canceled. They had a great young team, too. They had Delino DeShields, they had Marquise Grissom, they had Pedro Martinez. I believe they had, I want to say they had Vladimir Guerrero already up. They had already called him up from the minors. I'm trying to remember if he was up from the minors or not. But that team did lead the National League in wins when the season was canceled.
We trying to get back to being popular in the minds of the people. We've infuriated America. We sat up there and buffered the NBA, all right, and the National Football League because we had the temerity, the unmitigated goal to
the audacity. Don't forget that one, Steve.
Cancel the World Series September of 1994 due to the lengthy lockout, the strikeout, okay? So what I'm saying to you is this. That very next year, you come back into the mind's eye of the American public. They needed the players not just to play. We have never seen baseball players work that hard to ingratiate themselves with the public than they did in 1995 because they knew how much trouble the sport was in.
That was a great playoff in 95 also. The Yankees played the Seattle Mariners. I believe that was the series where the Yankees went up 2-0 and Seattle came back and won the last 3 games. Of course, culminating in the great Ken Griffey Jr. rounding the bases and beating the throw home to win the series. I remember like it was yesterday. I've never seen a man round the bases as fast as Ken Griffey Jr. rounded those damn bases. When I believe it was Edgar Martinez who doubled into the outfield.
When you canceled the World Series because you alienated and infuriated the American fan base. It's that simple to me. And so when I look at it from that perspective, I think about it along those lines, and I'm saying to me, wait a minute, you were striking out all the damn time. You're a career 263 average, all right? You were up and down in terms of the home runs. 70 home runs in the season again? I simply doubt it. I don't buy it 1 second. I don't buy it.
There's no chance. There's no chance.
Cheaters never prosper. Still to come. Ben Simmons.
But anyway, that's it on that topic. I just wanted to cover this because it harkened me back to the era where I followed baseball very closely. I don't really follow it now, but at that time I was a big baseball fan. But anyway, peace.